We are in week 3 of this very, very challenging time, this time of milchama, this time of war for our people. And we are looking forward to a speedy resolution to the conflict that will result in a complete elimination of our enemy and peace in the land and safety for everyone. And Hashem should watch over all of us and over all of our people. And we hope that our Torah study today helps in some small way in this war effort. So let us just continue where we left off in the Kuzari. We're actually picking up on a new point today, which is very timely. We're on page 434 in the text. We just learn a very small portion of the text of Kuzari every week, and then we go right into the Parsha. So today will be no exception. I just want us to get our bearings as to where we left off last time. We were discussing the whole idea of how there are other belief systems that exist in the world, some of which are closer to Judaism because of their monotheistic beliefs and because of their emphasis on either the Bible or the Quran, which is based on the Bible. But then there are other belief systems that are further away, that are more idolatrous. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi wanted to point out to us that even those sects within Judaism historically that were involved with idolatry were still closer to traditional Judaism than other religions that have cropped up more recently. So that was really where we were. Now, in what context were we having this discussion? This is a larger discussion of how God manifests himself in this world to mankind. And this is we could take this conversation in many different directions, but human beings perceive a higher power in many, many different ways. Jews perceive Hashem in a way that is based upon our history of prophecy. This was really Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's emphasis throughout this work, the Kuzari, that the prophetic experience is really the major underpinning of all of our faith, because we don't believe in God based on intellectual reasoning alone. We don't base our faith on rationality, on reason. We base our faith on the experience of being connected to God face to face. Our ancestors, our avot and imahot that we're reading about now, had prophetic face-to-face experiences with God. And then there was a mass revelation, a prophetic revelation that took place at Sinai. And that is really the basis, because Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's thesis, which is very much unlike other Jewish authors of his time, is that your intellect can be very deceptive and you can be misled by arguments which you believe are rational, but in reality are really your sort of ulterior motives and desires pulling you in a way that is away from Hashem, to make it free for you and guilt-free for you to do the things that you want to do. So because the basis of everything that we believe is our history of revelation, we Jews also have a unique way of identifying God, because we identify God as he was known by the Nevi'im, by the prophets, in that face-to-face revelation with him. And that is the 4-letter name of Hashem. And that's really how we started this entire section, the Kuzari section 4, which is that God revealed himself to mankind in a unique way. He revealed himself to our prophets first, and then that mass revelation that took place at Sinai. This took us sort of to a sidebar, which is where we've been for the last several pages, which is that other nations have also had their own sort of confrontations with God, but it has not been on the prophetic level in the same way that it was with the Ribono Shel Olam. And as a result, even religions that are offshoots of Judaism, meaning specifically he's referring to Christianity and Islam, they also base their religions on face-to-face encounters with the divine, but they've taken the best parts of Judaism and moved away from our tradition, and that's why they that's why they are not the real deal. Okay, and that was really the whole connection to this discussion. So now, have I framed this okay for you? This is where we are now in this conversation. And that's why when we pick up on page 434 on paragraph 15, at the very bottom of the page, the rabbi just wants to make a point of saying that the issue that you raised about idolatrous kings and periods of our history which were idolatrous as being closer to traditional Judaism than the later religions that cropped up out of Judaism that were monotheistic, that's it's very clear to me, but we have digressed from our discussion of the different manifestations of God, and we should return to it. And here, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is going to explain why the entire first chapter of Genesis does not contain the real or the truest name of Hashem, which is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And let's sort of really open with a question. The very first pasuk of Genesis is Bereshis bara Elokim eis hashamayim ve'eis haaretz. In the beginning, Elokim created heaven and earth. Now, if you were writing the Torah and you wanted to describe God, what name of God would you use? What name of God would you think would be appropriate to use if you're describing the creator of heaven and earth? Would you not want to use the Shem Havaya, the more sort of authentic name of God? What we associate as being the more authentic name of God. So the commentaries all ask this question: why, when the Torah begins, are we introduced to Hashem as Elokim and not by his four-letter name, the Tetragrammaton, which is really more what we are told, according to our tradition, is more descriptive of God's essence? You hear the question? So there are a number of answers. Rashi is the most sort of often quoted answer, because Rashi also not only tells us that Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and Elokim are different in that one is more close to the prophetic understanding of God versus the other, but that Yud-Kei Vav-Kei implies Midat HaRachamim and Elokim implies Midat HaDin. And originally, when God created the world, his preference was that the world be governed by the strict letter of justice, Midat HaDin. And that's why he began the creation with Elokim. But then God saw, after creating man and seeing how flawed he was, that it would not be possible for man to endure for any length of time with Midat HaDin alone. And so therefore, only after man's creation are we introduced to the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which implies that God had to temper his justice with mercy in order to accommodate man's flaws. Yeah. Yeah, so the question that you're asking is sort of self-apparent. Like, does that mean, no, God's created man and said, oh, I didn't realize he was going to be so problematic, this human being, right? So I better change. Does that not imply, I guess we would say from a philosophical point of view, that an immutable God is mutable and God changes, and God lacked divine foreknowledge when he created the world? So this is a question, this is one of those writ large questions, right? Which of course, anytime you see God changing his mind in Tanakh, you have to say that this is God sort of framing it for us, and not from a divine perspective. So so of course, the whole story about God having remorse that he created man, which is at the end of Parshat Bereshit, right? Ki nichamti ki asitim. I regret that I have created man. How does the all-perfect God have regret? And the answer is that God knew, of course, that when he created man, that man would descend into chaos and evil. And that man would be overcome by the overwhelming temptations of the physical world, and that God would have to make certain modifications. But there are inherent lessons there that mankind is thrust in a very opaque world, that it can be very confusing. And in order for human beings to have confidence in themselves, that despite the fact that we mess up so often, we still are redeemable creatures, it's important for us to read those stories and see, God, you put us in this very, very compromised position. God says, yes, I know, you're going to fall as more times than you're going to be successful. And that's how I made you. And understand that even allowing you to, I sort of had to lower the bar of the obstacle course. It's like, when you ever go bowling, for the little kiddies, they put up the gutters, they put up those bumpers for the kids. So basically, the creation was originally with the gutters open. And then when God saw we kept getting gutter balls, he lifted up those guardrails to make sure that we would be prevented from getting so many gutter balls. And that's the story. That's really the whole story of creation. But it's really a lesson for mankind, not a lesson for God.
That God wanted to create the world was going to be run in justice. So, but it sounds to me like you mean like everything would go according to should go properly, should be properly. But when you say that, I interpret it more like, okay, so God created the world with justice right from the beginning, knowing in advance that man would sin, yes, and they would receive justice from him, right?
Yeah.
And later, like, it doesn't mean that he didn't know, but it's like later when man kept being bad and doing horrible things, God presented his aspect of mercy to them. It doesn't mean he didn't know they were going to do that. Because I'm saying, like, by justice, yes, meaning he already knew he was going to have to.
Right, so you're helping answer Goldie's question, right? In other words, yeah, the idea that, but you're still left with the question: is that why, if God knew that he was going to have to invoke his attribute of mercy in order to accommodate man, why then doesn't that name appear at the beginning of the Torah? If God already knows what he's going to have to do, and the answer is that it's a lesson for man, that we shouldn't. On the one hand, we shouldn't knock ourselves too much because we were created this way. But on the other hand, we shouldn't be too proud of ourselves, because we have to also realize that God is not working according to the rules of justice with us. He put up the cushions to make sure we don't get gutter balls. Yeah. So that's that's the idea that is being portrayed. The only thing I want to contrast here, we probably won't even have a chance to start the text today, is that for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, there's another reason why the four-letter name of Hashem does not appear in the first chapter of creation. And it's because that's not the way that God manifested himself to the world that was devoid of humans. Only the human being is capable of having that understanding and perception of the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei manifestation of God. So before man enters into the theater of existence, there's no place for Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. It is because of man that God manifests his name that is more real and is more reflective of God's essence to the world. Right? God is always concealing himself to some degree. God has revealed himself to the greatest degree possible to our physical realm, to mankind and to mankind only. So that's the reason why it's only after man is created that we encounter the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Not so much having to do with mercy versus justice, like Rashi said, but rather who is privy to this greater manifestation of God, not all of creation, but only man. And according to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, as we've said many times, only a segment of humanity, because there are very few prophets in relation to all of humankind, to all of the human population. So that was the message that I wanted to get across today from the Kuzari, and I want to sort of hold it here because I have a lot to say today about the Parsha. And I'm developing an idea that I'd like to share with you. And it's in the process of development, and I hope maybe by Shabbos I'll have it more refined. But it's just an important idea that struck me when I was looking at the Parsha or thinking about the Parsha. So let me just bring up the handout and I'll put it on the screen. Any other questions while we're just bringing this up? Okay, here we are. Okay, so the title of this Devar Torah you may not be happy with. It's called the Hamas of Sarah. Okay, which sounds pretty discordant and paradoxical. Okay, but we do see a story in our parsha. You know, after we're introduced to Avram, we read about the very great relationship. And maybe should I make this larger? Maybe let me make it a little bit larger for our audience. Zoom in. Does that make it a little bit better? Okay. Okay. There we go. Okay. So we have a story that begins at the beginning of chapter 16 of Sefer Bereshis about Sarai, the wife of Avram, who sadly, tragically, did not have children. And she had a handmaid whose name was Hagar. And so the Torah relates that Sarai tells her husband Avram, Hinena tzarani Hashem miledet, God has prevented me from being able to bear a child. Bona el shifchati ulai ibane mimena. So consort with my handmaid, because maybe I can be built, maybe that, I'll become a surrogate mother through Hagar's child. Vayishma Avram b'kol Sarai. And Avraham listens. Avraham heeds her advice. And he wants, it's unclear from the verse whether he's doing it more for her, whether he's doing it for him. But the Torah tells us that he listened to her. He listened to her. Okay, so we know the story. She takes Hagar. And it's after 10 years of Avraham and Sarah living in Eretz Yisrael. And our rabbis actually, from the fact that the Torah says, Miketz eser shanim l'shevet Avram be'eretz Canaan, that after 10 years of them living in the land of Canaan, this happens, our sages actually learn from this, that it's only after trying for 10 years living in Eretz Yisrael that a couple should consider adopting a child. That's one of the things that they derive from here. Vayavo el Hagar vatahar. So Avraham consorts with Hagar. She becomes pregnant right away. According to Rashi, it was just, she became pregnant the first night. Vatera ki harata. And she sees that she's pregnant. Vatekal givirta be'eneha. And her matron, her boss, Sarah, becomes light in her eyes. And as Rashi relates from the Midrash, the reason why Sarah became light in her eyes is because she said to herself, look, I'm not of any significant progeny, but Sarah holds herself up as being the matron, as being this holy person. Why is it that, I get pregnant right away and she's not? It must be that she's not the person that she holds herself to be. And that's why she became haughty as a result. Vatomer Sarai el Avram, Chamasi alech. So Sarah said to Avram, my Hamas is upon you. Now, what does the word Hamas mean? By the way, we did see the word Hamas in last week's Parsha as well. But this time, because it says Vatim alei haaretz Hamas, the earth was filled with violence. That's what the word Hamas means. So now we see the word Hamas again appearing in the Parsha. This time, Sarah is saying to Avraham, my Hamas is upon you. Here, you can't say that it means violence, but a Hamas means a wrathful violence. In other words, a tumultuous violence. And so what Sarah seems to be implying to Abraham is that what I am experiencing now, what I am feeling, this feeling of rejection and condescension and the seat of power being switched between Hagar and myself, which is creating such turmoil in my life, that's on you. That's on you, Abraham. Okay? So as Rashi points out, Hamas ha'asui, the great turbulence that has been caused to me through this whole experience, Alecha ani matil ha'onesh. I blame you, and you're deserving of the blame for this, Avraham, my husband. So think about the shalom bias problems that are going on here. And Rashi says that when you, Avraham, davened for a child, lohit palalta ela alecha, you only asked God, please give me a child. You didn't say, give us, my wife and I, a child. V'hayalacha lihitpalel al shenenu, v'hayiti ani nifkedet imach. If you would have davened for both of us jointly, then we would have had a child together. Va'od, and furthermore, Rashi says, Devarecha ata chomes mimeni, sha'ata shomea bizyoni v'shotek. And also, another explanation of Hamas is that you, Avraham, are the chomes. You're the one who's acting with Hamas. So the word Hamas means turbulence and turmoil and pain, but it also means that you're actually causing me. You are, because the word to be chomes is to forcefully take something from someone. And how are you doing that? It's through your passive aggressiveness. Now, what she meant by saying that was, you're seeing this all unfold in real time, and you haven't said a word. And many times what you learn from here is that silence is not always the correct response. You can't say, well, a husband can't say, what did I do? And the answer is, well, why didn't you say something, right? That's a legitimate complaint. Man can't say, well, I didn't do anything. That's not a legitimate argument. You just sat there and did nothing as this was all unfolding, and you see how Hagar holds me in contempt now, and you say nothing about it. So that's her complaint. So there are two explanations in Rashi about what the word Hamas means. Hamas means my own inner turbulence, and I hold you to blame from that, Avraham. But Hamas also means to take something, take my serenity and take my peace and harmony away from me. You've done that, Avraham, by you saying nothing. You're making things worse by just assenting through your passivity. Okay?
Oh, I guess Abraham didn't think that in that way.
Yeah, it's a good argument. Anyway, so Rachel is asking the question, why is this a complaint? What right does Sarah have to complain? I mean, she's the one who asked Avram to do this. So if she asked Avram to do this, why should she complain after the fact if she's the one who initiated it? I think the response is that neither Avram or Sarah knew what the source of the infertility was. Sometimes it's the man, sometimes it's the woman. So she felt to herself, look, if you're the source of the infertility, Avram, so Mela, nothing's going to happen when you consort with Hagar, but at least it's worth a try. But if it turns out that you're capable of reproducing, then obviously Hashem has blessed you and not blessed me. So now I have a complaint, right? Because if that's the case, and Hashem has blessed you because you davened to him, then she can only complain once she sees that Hagar has gotten pregnant.
So it's like a litmus test?
Yeah, it was a litmus test. Yeah.
You know, I feel like Abraham's in a bad position. He's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't,
Yeah.
according to Sarah's view.
According
The child to Hagar, but she didn't ask to finish. No, that's a separate thing, but I'm saying I just don't feel like her complaint against Abraham is.
Realize how she can feel when.
That's also a good point. Yeah.
Like, we often will ask for something, and then when we get it, we're upset, because we didn't realize what the ramifications would be of getting it. I mean, how could she envision what it would be like for another woman to have a child with her husband?
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. She thought she didn't realize what the after effect would be, especially now because she didn't anticipate that Hagar was going to react in the way that she did. Hagar was not innocent here. Hagar was actually quite not behaving correctly. She should have remained humble and not have jumped to that conclusion. But in any event, at this point, no, we're not even talking about siring the Jewish people. That's right. For all we know, at this point, Sarah thought that she would be the surrogate mother of the leader, the progenitor of the Jewish people. That's what she thought. But her anger is still on Avraham, and so Yishbot Hashem beini uvenecha. So she says, let God judge between you and me. So obviously there's this marital disharmony that arises because of this, quite understandably so. And then what happens? So what is Avraham's response? Avraham's response is Hinei shivchatech biyadech. He's basically saying, she's still your shivcha. Trust me. Just because she thinks that she's holier than thou, I have not changed my view of her as being your handmaid. Asila hatov be'inayich, you do whatever you feel is correct. Vate'aneha sarai, vativrach mipaneha. Sarah afflicted her, that's literally what it means, and she fled. Now, Sarah afflicted her, we don't know what that means. We have no idea what that means. What does it mean? That she pushed her? That she yelled at her? Something that made Hagar feel unwelcome. And as a result, Hagar runs away from the home. Okay? Now, Rashi tells us, Haita mishabedet ba bekoshi, that what Sarah basically felt she needed to do was to reassert her role as the matron of the home. Because again, this power shift where Hagar feels that she's the boss now because she's pregnant with Avram's child. No, Sarah says, I need to reassert my control. You're still my maiden, my slave girl. And therefore, we need to reinforce that. So she worked her even harder than before. Okay, the Ramban tells us something shocking. Okay. Vate'aneha sarai vativrach mipaneha. Take a look at these words of the Ramban. This is the main part of the shir. Chata'a imenu bi'inui hazeh. Our matriarch, our bubby, Sarah, committed a sin by afflicting Hagar. V'gam Avraham bahanicho la'asot kain. And Avraham our Zedi also committed a sin by allowing this to happen. V'shama Hashem el anya. Hashem heard Hagar's affliction. V'natan la ben, sheyehe pere Adam, and he therefore gave Hagar a son who would be a pere of a man, a wild man. Le'anot zera Avraham v'Sarah b'chol minei ha'inoi, so that the descendant of Ishmael would exact retribution from the descendants of Avraham and Sarah in all manner of affliction. In all manner of affliction. And Pera Adam means a wild man. Pera is like a donkey. And what Rashi gets these words because later on in the story that an angel comes to Hagar and says to her after she's run away, "Hina chora violadet bein." You're going to you are now pregnant and you're going to have a son. The karat shemo Yishmael ki shama Hashem elon yech. You will call his name Yishmael because God has heard your voice. V'hu yihye pere Adam. He's going to be a wild ass of a man. Yado vakol v'yad kol bo. His hand will be in everyone, and everyone's hand will be in him. Ve'al penei kol echav yishkon, and he will dwell in the face of all of his brethren. Whatever those words mean. But that's not the main part of our discussion today. But I wanted to sort of put this out there that this suffering that has occurred at the hand of Yishmael is right there encoded in the very origins of our people. The Radak elaborates on this idea, and he says, "Vate'aneha Sarai, asta ima yoter midai, v'ibeda ba befarech." That Sarah overworked Hagar, she overdid it, and made her work with excessive labor, parech, like we know the Jews worked with parech in Egypt. Efshar shahita maka ota, it's possible that she struck her, umekalelet ota, or that she cursed her, velo hayita yechola lisbol ubarcha mipaneha, and it's possible that she could not endure this, and that's why she ran away. Velo nahaga Sarah bazel lemidat musar, velo lemidat chasidut. And Sarah, this is the Radak, okay? Sarah did not behave in a musar fashion, in a refined fashion, nor in a pious fashion in this respect. Lo musar, ki afal pisha Avraham mochela al kvodo, va'amar la asila hatov benachsu. She did not act in a refined way, because even though Avraham basically said, I'm giving you full control of this situation. I don't have to know about it. It's not up to me. I give it all over to you. Haya ra'ui la limshoch et yada lichvodo v'lo la'anota. But she should have done the right thing. The fact that Hagar was pregnant with Avraham's child meant that she should have showed a little bit more respect to Hagar and not treated her that way. V'lo midat chasidut v'nefesh tova, nor did she act piously, or with what he says, with a good soul, with a good spirit. Ki ein re'uya la'adam la'asot kol yecholto b'meshet tachat yado, because just because you can exploit someone doesn't mean that you should. Ve'amar hechacham man ava ha'mechila be'et ha'yecholet. As the wise man once said, he quotes a wise man who says that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And therefore, how goodly is it when you can forgive someone even when you don't have to? And therefore, what Sarah did was not good in God's eyes. And that's why the angel told Hagar when they were in the wilderness, God has heard your suffering. And God basically gave her a blessing to sort of offset all of her suffering. Va'avram lo mana Sarai mila'anota af al pi shehaya ra be'einav. Now, Avraham is complicit, and he did stop Sarah from doing these oppressive things to Hagar, and he sort of averted his gaze, even though he knew it was wrong. Ishum shalom bias, because he wanted to maintain peace in the home. V'chein zeh hasipor nichtov b'Torah. So why does this story appear in the Torah? If it's speaking disparagingly, if it's a story that sort of describes something that went wrong in the behavior of Sarah and her husband, then why is it in the Torah?
The Torah never shies away from talking about
So you're right, the Torah never shies away, but the answer is, says the Radak, liknot adam mimenu hamidot tovot ulaharchi karaot, is because the Torah is not just interested in heaping praise upon our ancestors so that we learn the good behavior, but it's also there to teach us their flaws so that we learn not to repeat them. This is like wow, this sort of blows you away when you read this Radak, that we're supposed to learn from our ancestors' mistakes. Sarah was wrong in what she did. And we learn from that. We learn that, I know that there are going to be people in my life that I'm very jealous of, that I view as rivals. And when I get the upper hand, I can really give it to them, because they were mean to me when they were on top. So I can give it right back to them. And that's one of the things that you learn from this. That's not how to behave. It's not how we're supposed to behave. Yes.
when you're talking about the sons of Noah. You're gonna ask them. And you gave me a simple answer, that it's rectification. I mean, I know we know that Masa Arosim and Rabbanim, but it still just doesn't sit right with me that, what happens in Bereshis with the Avos has to then happen in perpetuity forever to us.
And she was rewarded. She did get pregnant. She was rewarded, but people for generations you're implying are going to suffer at the hands of Ishmael.
So you're asking such an important question, and I think that this is where we're leading to, which is, why should the descendants of Sarah have to suffer because of a mistake that she made? And it's been so many generations. It's not like we're her children. We're her, how many hundreds of generations has it been? And how much longer do we have to suffer? So there are two ways of understanding this. There's more than two ways, and I'm going to sort of, again, try to be a little bit simplistic because I want to go through everything today. But one explanation is that whenever we find ourselves repeating the same mistakes of our ancestors, we get caught in the same kinds of patterns of suffering as our ancestors. In other words, like the story of Nadav and Avihu, according to our sages, they were killed, they were Aaron's sons, because Aaron participated in the making of the golden calf. So the question is, well, just because Aaron made the golden calf, why should his children suffer? And the answer that some commentaries give is you have to say that their action was somehow a repeat of the golden calf, which we won't get into right now, why that was a repeat. But when the sons continue or perpetuate the mistakes of the parents, that's when we get caught and ensnared. I'm not making a political commentary now. I'm not saying that what the Jewish people are undergoing is because of a specific thing, but it is important to know that. If anything, the direction that I'm leading towards is that when there's not shalom bias, this is what causes breakdowns. Not only does the internal discord create disharmony in a relationship, but it also brings external suffering as well. So if anything, the direction I'm heading in, and I don't mean to be presumptuous, but if anything, the internal discord that was going on in Medinat Israel over the last several months was extremely unhealthy for a united nation. And if we look at an entire nation like a married couple, like an Avram and a Sarah, we overdid it, and we made some serious errors in judgment in the way that we were critical of each other and in the way that we took to the streets, and perhaps were overly dramatic in our proclamations. And maybe, this is what happens, is that, the whole Hagar and Yishmael story starts to manifest itself as a result. Again, that's a presumption that I'm not prepared to say emphatically, definitively is correct, but that may be one of the things that we're supposed to draw from here. I also want to point out that Yishmael, over every other nation, has a zechus that other nations don't have, is that Yishmael is blessed by an angel of God as being a wild man who will have power. And it's specifically, according to the Ramban, specifically because of his mistreatment at the hand of Avraham and Sarah. And we have to realize that it perhaps needs to be that until that they've exhausted their cruelty and all of the retribution that needs to happen will have finally happened, that's when the Geula is supposed to take place. We don't know. We just don't know. But there's something much larger than just reward and punishment that's taking place here.
Further, say that Esther, in the Megillah Esther, treated her maidservants very well. Why wasn't that elected? Well,
Okay. Well, there are a lot of connections between Esther and Sarah. Well, first of all, Esther's handmaidens were Persians. They weren't Arabs. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a way to rectify it through there. I do want to point out, and I want to make sure we don't run out of time. I do want to point out that not everyone agrees with the Ramban. There's a whole school of thought that says that Sarah did nothing wrong, because Hagar was really acting so incorrectly that Sarah's amount of sort of attempt to retake control over the relationship was not in any way inappropriate. As a matter of fact, the Sefarno says, "Vata'aneha Sarai," that Sarah afflicted her, "Kedei shetakir shehi mishubedet," so that she should still recognize, you're under my employ, you're under my servitude. Velo tivazeh odet gevirta, just as a means of making sure that she would not deprecate her master ever again. La'ot shekain yikre lechol mevazeh Yisrael komer v'yishtachavu al kapot raglayach kol mena'atzayach. And he just quotes a pasuk in Yeshaya that in the end of days, the world that had sort of stepped all over the Jewish people will come and bow down to the feet of the Jewish people. In other words, that's what Sarah was looking for, was to reposition the relationship, and she's not to be blamed for that. And the Sforno therefore downplays the idea of affliction. He would probably not agree with the Radak that she hit her and cursed her and so forth. Okay, I also want to point out that there's a Tosefta, which is a Mishnaic text, or composed at the same time as the Mishnah, which indicates that just like God said to Avraham in next week's Parsha, we have two episodes of Sarah and Hagar. One is in this week's Parsha, where Hagar leaves, she flees, but then she comes back and she submits herself to Sarah's authority. And apparently there's some kind of truce that is made between the two women, okay? And that's how Yishmael grows up in Abraham's house, okay? But then there's a second event when Yishmael is already a teenager and Yitzchak is a little boy. That's going to be in next week's Parsha. And Sarah sees that there's something very unhealthy, that Yishmael is a very, very bad influence upon her son. And she says, I don't want them living under our roof any longer. And Avraham is very disturbed by this because he loves both his sons. He loves Ishmael, he loves Yitzchak. And God speaks to Avraham and says, Kol asher tomar Sarah elecha shema bekola. Everything that Sarah tells you, listen to her. So the Tosefta asks the question, what do you mean kol, everything? Why not just say shema bekol Sarah, listen to her? What does it mean, everything that Sarah tells you, listen to her? So the Tosefta says God was basically endorsing Sarah's previous statement or previous argument to Avram that Hamasi alecha, my Hamas is upon you, I'm being mistreated. And God was basically taking Sarah's side and saying, yeah, she's right, Avram. And Sarah is correct in this argument. So that's the position that the Tosefta takes as well. We're not going to go into that today. But I do want to show you a small commentary that I happened to find by flipping through a bunch of Sfarim. This is a sefer called Pinine HaParsha. There's a young rabbi in Eretz Yisrael his name is Rabbi Ovaj Chain, and he wrote this commentary that I thought was very, very insightful, and I wanted to share with you. He says, he quotes a medrash, and he says, Bibreshit Rabba Masbirim ki Hagar Herima Rosh. The medrash says that Hagar became haughty. V'nahaga lomar lekulam b'kol yahir du'u lachem. And she would say in a loud voice, in an arrogant voice, I want you all to know, ki Sarah omnam ma'amida p'nei tzadeket ach ein tocha kibara. That Sarah holds herself as being righteous, but she really isn't. She's really just faking it. Ilu haita Sarai tzadeket klum lo haita nifkedet ze mikvar. Do you think that she would have, why was she barren so long? Look how easy it was for me to become pregnant. If she was really righteous, wouldn't she have become pregnant by now? Ine ani bat paro mitzrit, ein li yichus tov, ein li mitzvot, ubechol zot zachiti miyad lahipaked me Avraham. I'm an Egyptian princess. I don't have yichus. I don't have mitzvot the way Sarah seems to have, and yet I became pregnant right away. Hadavar kemuvan paga b'yecholta shel Sarah lahashiv b'tshuvat anashim shahita megayeret. Look at what the fallout is. This Rav Chaim says to Sarah's project. What was Sarah's life project at this point? Avram and Sarah were partners in doing what? They were doing chesed and trying to influence the world to accept God. That was really what they were both trying to do. Would you not agree? I mean, Betanefesh asher asu b'charan. They were trying to be Makarev people and bring them close to God. If you have someone who is sharing with all of the neighbors, Sarah, why would you want to listen to her? She's nothing special. So Hagar is actively negating Sarah's efforts to try and be a positive influence in the women in her city, wherever they're living. And this is what is so demoralizing to Sarah when you think about her larger project of what she's trying to accomplish with her life. And now she's got this detractor who's basically saying, why would you ever want to listen to her? She's not a good person. So therefore, v'nigram mikach chilul shem shamayim gadol. And this is what causes a chilul Hashem, that someone who represents God is being accused of not being good. Mikach hitzta'ara Sarah. And this is what caused Sarah so much pain. V'lachein hitbate'a le'Avraham b'tzura kasheh chamasi alecha. And that's why she was so full of complaint to Avram in a very harsh tone. Ata garamta zot ba'akifin ilu hayita mitpalel al shenenu hayinu nifkadim v'chait nigram chilul shem shamayim. So her accusation towards her husband, you should have davened for both of us. And that way people would see we're blessed, both of us, we're both holy people, we're both representing Hashem. And the fact that you didn't daven for me means that there's this sort of like this cloud over my reputation. And that's what she was so concerned about. Maha pitaron shel Sarah, hitrachakut. So how does Sarah try to solve the problem? let's put some distance between my biggest critic and myself. He goremet lekach shehagar ta'azov et ha'ezor, v'te'aneha Sarai v'tivrach mipaneha. And that's what Sarah did. She put enough pressure on Hagar to make it so uncomfortable for her that she would leave. She would leave the neighborhood. Hitnahalut zeh shel Sarah goreret bikoret b'divrei Chazal. And this is why our sages are critical of Sarah. Her action caused many of our sages to be critical of her. So, and he quotes the Ramban. He says, Umadua. But the question is, why should the Ramban be so critical of Sarah for doing the right thing? Hagar was creating a chilul Hashem. She was preventing Sarah from doing her work. Why should the Ramban be so critical of her? Halo Sarah pa'ala b'diyuk kefisha pa'ala Avraham imlot kasher amar al haperek chilul Hashem. Consider for a moment that earlier in our parsha we read a story about Avraham and Lot. You know that story where Avraham and Lot are initially grazing together their flocks? And Avraham sees that Lot and his employees are doing things that are unethical, and they're allowing their animals to graze on other people's property without muzzling their animals. And people are getting upset. So Avraham says to Lot, listen, we got to put distance between ourselves. I'm not happy with the way you're behaving. And what you're doing is casting a shadow over me as well. People are going to think that I, as a man of God, am justifying unethical behavior. So let's part ways. Now, when you think about it in that context, is what Sarah was doing so different from what Avraham is doing? Sarah was basically distancing herself from Hagar, just like Avram was distancing himself from Lot to avoid the chilul Hashem. The Avram kibel ishur al kach me Hashem, and Avram, his behavior was endorsed by God. We don't see that what he did was wrong. Ela omrim rabotenu. So our sages explain, Shalamrot shahamatara haita miniat chilul shem Hashem, mikol makom haya al Sarah lasod zot b'tzura acheret. The answer is that even though what Sarah was doing was correct, to place distance between her and Hagar and avoid the chilul Hashem, but she should have done it in a different way. Shekain me'etzem tzurat ha'archaka notzar chilul Hashem. So he says, because even though Sarah's objective was to eliminate the chilul Hashem, but the way she did it also brought a chilul Hashem, right? By showing cruelty to another human being. V'im kain chilul Hashem notar be'eino. And therefore, so she's only allowing a chilul Hashem to linger. Eitzel Avraham, barur haya harchaka eina ba'a al reka ishi, ki lo rak shelo hirviach meharchaka shum revach gashmi, ela adarabah hifsid mikach. He says it was clear in Avraham's situation that it was not a personal issue for him. He wasn't doing this for personal gain to distance himself from Lot. Because if anything, he actually lost out by letting Lot choose whatever direction you go, Lot, I'll go in the opposite direction. That's basically what Avram said to Lot. And by giving Lot that option of choosing the choicest real estate for grazing the animals, Avram actually was causing himself to lose out by getting the inferior fields. Okay, Shanata, right? And that's what he says in the next couple of lines. But v'ilu eitzel Sarah mitzirat ha'archaka shel bate'aneha Sarah ha'menia yachol lihitparesh kepula ishit shel nekama v'kina. But when you look at Sarah's story and you see that she acted cruelly with Hagar, the interpreter could say, well, she did it because she was jealous, she was petty, and she wanted to get back at the woman who caused her so much pain. Sarah vadai hitkavnu l'shem shamayim b'ofan muchlat. Aval habriot haraot leinaim v'lo levav kinireh zot kepu'ula shlilit. So basically, he's suggesting that even though Sarah may have acted l'shem shamayim, she was very justified in distancing Hagar from her, but the observer, who did not know what was in her heart, could easily have interpreted her behavior as being selfish and petty and based on personal jealousy. V'achein, b'takrit haba'a kasher shuv ne'etzu Avraham v'Sarah laharchik et Hagar v'et bina. And therefore, in the next episode, where we're going to read in next week's Parsha, where Sarah says to her husband, I don't want them living with us anymore. Sarah mishana et gishata. Sarah changes her whole approach. V'niz heret lebal teitze takala v'lazut sfatayim kitotza'a me'archaka. And she's careful. This time, they make sure that when they send Hagar away, they're going to send her away with derech eretz. They're going to give her a package, some provisions, and basically wish them well and say, go back to your home, go back to wherever you came from. We're not able to host you anymore in our house because of the negative impact that this is having on our son's chinuch, our son's upbringing. But at the same time, we're not able, they didn't do it in a cruel way. Next week's Parsha, they give Hagar provisions, and that's the reason why Shebemakom shenotzar chilul Hashem, he says va'anu al pi darkeinu lamadu. He says, based on the way we're presenting this story, that whenever there is a chilul Hashem, yesh lifol b'tzura necheretzet, he says, then a person should behave in a way that is clever to make sure that by eliminating the chilul Hashem, you don't cause another chilul Hashem in the process. ומאידך בדרך שתשיג את המטרה ולא תגרום לחילול השם נוסף. כי גם כאשר המטרה חיובית, לא כל האמצעים להשגתה כשרים. He says, because even when action is necessary, even when you need to eliminate the chilul Hashem, you have to do it in a way that is wise, that is calculated in such a way that you won't create an additional chilul Hashem. Now, I want to be very, very careful in the way that we conclude our discussion today. No one is capitulating to the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the media that says that Israel has no right to retaliate against its enemy. That's not what we're suggesting. But as a matter of fact, if you look at it objectively and based on international law, as was just, I just saw a clip about it, Israel is doing everything that it's supposed to do under international law to engage in warfare and at the same time minimize civilian casualties as much as possible. Anyone who is sympathetic to Israel and to the Jewish people will see that and see that Israel is doing its best to avoid a chilul Hashem, while at the same time, through the war itself, is trying to correct the chilul Hashem that was created through this horrific attack on October 7th. And that, I think, is a very important lesson to take from here, is that when you are trying to defend the honor of the Jewish people, which is ultimately the honor of God, because we are God's people, you need to do so in such a way that will not in itself create a chilul Hashem. And so that's why the Jewish people have a responsibility to always hold our heads up high, to behave with dignity and with compassion to all humankind, and to eliminate our enemies in a way that will, in the best way possible, avoid a further chilul Hashem. And we should see that very soon. Yes, go ahead, please. Every time you see Sinas Chinim, you see unfortunate fallout. Yeah. Well, so let me just say that what the silver lining of this war is. You mentioned the Sinas Chinim aspect. One thing that we're not seeing anymore is that dividing line in Israeli society. So we're taking perhaps you can call that a chilul Hashem, the Sinas Chinim, and now it's been sort of turned around, okay? So that's one way of fixing the chilul Hashem at a terrible, terrible cost that we should not have had to pay. We should not have had to pay. And at a terrible, terrible cost, yes. Okay, anyone else on, let me just see if there's anyone on the, what am I supposed to be looking for? The chat. What was Hagar's positive quality that she was chosen to be a handmaid? Well, not only was she chosen to be a handmaid, but if you look in Parshas Chaye Sarah, after Sarah dies, Avraham takes a wife whose name is Keturah. And according to our sages, Keturah is Hagar. So that Avraham actually remarried Hagar. So there must have been something positive about her, and the fact that the angel told her in our Parsha, go back to Sarah and submit to her, means that Hagar learned her lesson. Hagar actually, humbled herself. So it also shows that even though Hagar did not behave correctly, but she learned her lesson and she humbled herself and she submitted once again. So there must have been affection between Avram and Hagar, at least for that. Okay. Okay, so everybody, I want to thank you all for joining us. We've gone a little bit over time. Is Karen not here? Karen, you're speechless today? What happened? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Everyone take care. Everyone stay safe. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.